Welcome you watching India Ahead with me, Neha Khanna. As we gradually emerge from the second wave of the coronavirus pandemic, scores of Indian students are facing a huge predicament. That's because many of them have got admissions to different colleges and universities in the United States, but it seems like they cannot join these universities anytime soon. Why is that? Because almost 400 colleges and universities across the United States have declared that they will only allow entry to those foreign students who've been inoculated with vaccines that have been approved by the World Health Organization. In fact, it gets worse because there are some universities in the US that are willing to only accept those students who've been vaccinated with vaccines that have the approval of the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration in the US. What does this mean? Well, it certainly is a very difficult situation for Indian students who've got admissions to these universities and colleges but don't know what to do, because remember, the only 3 vaccines that are currently available in India are Covaxin, Covishield, Sputnik V. Guess what? None of these have been approved by the Food and Drug Administration of the United States of America. Only one of them has got an approval from the WHO, that's Covishield. Covaxin and Sputnik V are yet to be endorsed even by the World Health Organization. Now, a lot of these universities are saying we are willing to get these foreign students revaccinated when they arrive in the United States. But there is a predicament even there. There are many students who've already got 1 or 2 jabs of other vaccines. Is it safe and medically advisable to mix vaccines? Remember, there is as of now no data available on mixing of vaccines in India. Therefore, if you've got 1 dose of Covaxin, is it safe to go ahead and get another dose of Pfizer? Also, remember that the Indian government has increased the gap between 2 Covishield doses to 12 to 16 weeks, which means the wait for a lot of students who may have received 1 jab so far gets longer to get the second jab. Many of them may not be able to make it in time for the start of the semester, which in fact starts at most universities in August or September. So the students and parents are staring at a lot of uncertainty at the moment and doubtless suffering from a lot of anxiety and stress. They just don't know what to do. Should they go ahead and get revaccinated, even if it means mixing of vaccines on which there is really no data or study available in India yet? What do the doctors have to say? Should they delay their departure to the United States and attend classes online initially and risk lagging behind their fellow classmates? Well, we don't even know if that's going to be allowed by these universities. Or should some of these students just decide not to go to the US at all and risk losing a year? These are some very difficult questions that these students across India are facing. And remember, annually 2 lakh students from across India go to the United States of America for higher education. And what kind of money do these universities make in tuition fees? To the tune of $39 billion. Let's not forget, they do make a lot of money from foreign students, including a very large number of Indian students. But at the moment, it seems they're not willing to relent as far as these rules are concerned. So what does this mean for the students? What should they do next? Let's put those questions to our panel. Joining me on the show, Dr. ANIL ARORA, Chairman, Institute of Liver Gastroenterology at Sri GANGARAM Hospital in Delhi. Sudhanshu Kaushik, Executive Director of the North American Association of Indian Students, and also joining us, 2 students who are facing the conundrum that we just described to you. Khushi Agnish, who in fact we are told has got admission to a university in Connecticut in the USA, and she in fact has got the Covishield vaccine. Rishabh Sonkar is planning to leave for the US to study at Columbia University in New York, where he's got admission. He is in Kolkata, but again the question is, can he leave in time? What does he do about his vaccines? Those are some very difficult questions. Sudhanshu Kaushik, if I could start with you, You are a student in New York helping other students who are facing a predicament of this nature. What kind of queries are you getting? How worried are students and their parents? And also, is there any indication whatsoever that these universities are willing to show any kind of flexibility? Because if not, then a lot of these students are going to be in trouble.
Absolutely. I mean, the questions that we get range from them being worried about, as you described, vaccination policies through how their semester will look like if they're not able to get vaccinations, what happens to their tuition, what happens to their deposits, to now a source of frustration. And now they're venting to us about how there hasn't been too much communication, there hasn't been a synchronized way of what's really happening. And I believe that this predicament that we're in is the causality of the lack of centralization when it comes to vaccinations. Look, the United States is the hub of international students. These educational institutions are the first to go out there to recruit Indian students, recruit them for their tuition money, recruit them for all the economic opportunities that they bring to the United States. But this really shows the lack of understanding of, when people say vaccine disparity, of how the developed world looks at developing nations and the situations and the context that they have to go through. This policy that's so decentralized, you said 400 universities in the beginning of the show, all 400 universities and how many ever that join have the autonomy and sovereignty to decide on their own what sort of policy they take in place. So if they want to open up the campus, they can decide technically if they want to include one vaccine or the other. The normal process right now is to just make credit basically the CDC and say these are, and as you've rightfully explained, CDC has highly prioritized FDA vaccines rather than WHO vaccines, which they're opening up to the possibility of. But again, it's the lack of centralized policy throughout that's really hurting all these students, whether you take from Rishabh to Columbia, to Kushi that's in Connecticut, to Republican-ruled governed states in Texas or Alabama who don't have a vaccination policy in place. And that adds to further confusion if, let's say, at the end of July, these universities do decide to inscribe a vaccination policies. What will students and international students do then? I would also say that there's a lack of centralized policies by the central government in India as well. You've rightfully highlighted that state governments were able to provide, prioritized student vaccines. This after a lot of lobbying, not just by us, by a lot of stakeholders as well.
Yes.
And the frustrating part is, yes, this was prioritized, but the reality is we didn't even know. We, as the lobbyists, didn't even know if the students were going to get COVAX or COVID Shield.
The uncertainty is what is truly troubling here. And you've hit the nail on the head, Sudhanshu, when you say that this is vaccine disparity. We've been talking about rich nations versus poorer countries, vaccine inequity in distribution and access, and now the students from the developing world are also facing the brunt of it. And even though just today the Prime Minister of India announced free vaccination for all above the age of 18 from the 21st of June, the question many are still asking is, where are the vaccines? India has a huge vaccine shortage. Let's not forget that. Let me go across to Kushi at this point. Kushi, tell us about your situation. Correct me if I'm wrong. You've got at least one dose of Covishield vaccine. You are headed to Connecticut in the US, but what exactly is your university telling you? Because the trouble is that most of these universities are saying that the vaccine that the student has received should be WHO approved, but there are some who've gone a step further and said that only FDA approved vaccines are acceptable to them, by which they mean Pfizer, Moderna and Johnson & Johnson, none of which are even available in India right now. Tell us about the difficulty you're facing right now.
So at the start of this whole thing, our university announced that we need to have an FDA-approved vaccine. So at that time, I really didn't know what to do because I had already received my first dose. But after that, I spoke to my university and they actually heard me and they said that we're going to have WHO-approved vaccines. So that was one good thing, but I obviously had to talk to them, go through a process.
Okay, so you are saying that they are willing to accept somebody who's got WHO approved vaccine. So I think you are safe there because you've got Covishield. However, those who've got Covaxin are going to get into trouble. So let me put that question to Rishabh. Rishabh, have you received any jabs yet? And the question really is, what is the way ahead? Because if, even if, let's say, tomorrow the government of India decides to prioritize students who need to travel abroad in their vaccination program, and yet, let's say they only have Covaxin and Sputnik V available for those students are still going to get into trouble with these American universities that are refusing to recognize these vaccines because the WHO refuses to recognize them.
Right. So to answer your question, I have not received any vaccine yet because I recovered from COVID in the mid of May. So technically, as per the government, Indian government protocol, I'm not allowed to take a vaccine until mid of June at least 4 to 5 weeks after I've tested negative last. So that puts me in a dire situation that I cannot take vaccine, and even if I were to take Covishield, the next jab would be after 84 days, which is after the start of the program. So my program starts on the 30th of August, and as per the norm, if I have to get a jab even in the mid of August or even now, my next jab would be overlaying my program date, which puts me into a very difficult situation to decide whether I should even take a vaccine or should I write an email to my university and ask them to give me a Pfizer after arrival, which is something that they're willing to accommodate, but that is only for an exception, not that they're going to normalize it for every student.
I think that is an important question. If you've not received a single vaccine, should you just wait to get to the United States and take Pfizer straight away? But then again, could entry into the country be a problem? They're willing to vaccinate students on campus, but will you be allowed entry into that country, especially given that the Delta variant, which is the predominant variant in India, has been classified as a variant of concern by the WHO, and as a result of that, a lot of countries have even forbidden travel to and from India. So will you even be allowed into the country to be able to get that vaccine? That in itself is a big question, isn't it, Rishabh?
It is. I mean, and that's something that is worrying most of my colleagues who are going to fly to the US, who supposedly flying to the US in August, because even if they've taken a vaccination, they're not sure if they're going to get the next one. And even if they did, even if they have to wait till August, they're not sure if there will be a travel restriction at that point in time, which is after 2 months from now. So that puts us all in a very tricky situation. And I think if we were to be given a choice, if our government could relax, like Sudhanshu was mentioning, if we could centralize the entire process, and like there are a few state governments who started the second dose of vaccination right after 40 days. If that is something that can be done for all the students who are flying to the US or all the people who are going to work in the US, I think that's going to relax a lot of.
Well, we certainly hope for your sake, Rishabh, and for the sake of all students like you, that the government does prioritize people like you in this entire vaccination drive. Before I go across to the doctor on the panel, Khushi, a quick question to you, since I'm sure you must be in touch with a lot of other Indian students who are also gearing up to leave for the US later this year. If the semester at most universities begins in the month of August or September, and let's say somebody's got one jab of Covishield and has to wait for 3 to 4 months to get the second jab, and that delays their departure, is a delayed departure an option? Or do you actually pretty much end up losing your college seat if you can't make it in time for the beginning of the semester?
So again, I have spoken to a lot of people. A lot of my friends are in this situation because they got their first jab like 2 to 3 days ago. But the situation here is that the rules which were set by the ICE related to international students, they had changed for the past year. And they're saying that there is discussion into changing that rule again, which states that an international student cannot take more than 3 credits. So if a university actually agrees and lets you come back, then you can definitely keep your seat and do online for, the time you are here. But otherwise, if your university is not willing to make that change, because a lot of universities over there, they are doing completely in person and no hybrid courses. So I feel like one would end up losing their college seat.
Now, that would be absolutely catastrophic for a student who's waiting to start the next chapter of their lives, by studying at an American university where they've already got admission, but may not be able to actually join because of this vaccine conundrum. That would be absolutely terrible. We hope nobody has to go through that. But I think Sudhanshu was right in pointing out that there is no centralized policy even in the United States as far as, vaccination of foreign students is concerned. And also every university seems to have its own rule. Some may allow online classes, others may not. Let me go across to the doctor on the panel now. Dr. Anil Arora, when we last discussed the idea of doing a study on mixing of vaccines on this very show, you were with us. That was the day Dr. V.K. Paul of Niti Aayog had said India was going to undertake such trials, and you were strongly opposed to the idea. You believe medically it is not a good idea, it doesn't make sense. Now, sir, what would your advice be to all these students who are in a fix because one, American universities are saying you should have only been vaccinated with Pfizer, Moderna or Johnson & Johnson, or, if you haven't got those vaccines yet, come to the US and we will revaccinate you. Now, somebody may have already got one dose of Covaxin or Covishield. They might be required to take another dose of Pfizer when they arrive in the United States. The question is it safe? Is it medically advisable? What do the students do? Many of them are obviously scared that there might be side effects.
I think, Neha, you have raised a very pertinent question. If you look at the basics of vaccination, after all, US has authorized a number of vaccines which have been certified by WHO. Indian government has only 2 vaccines till date. One of them is a Covishield and another is a Covaxin. And Covishield has already been certified by WHO. Now, even in US, they will be doing some antibody test to be sure that if you have been vaccinated well, with the vaccination, you will have some antibody. So they would have a particular test. I think if we can do the same test as authorized by the US authorities for all those who have been vaccinated in India, so where is the problem? So even after going into US, you have to certify this guy has enough of antibodies. Same test we can apply to our students. Suppose there is let me give you an example of Abbott kit which tells you that you have sufficient antibodies. So whether it is because of Covishield, Sputnik or Covaxin, how does it matter? So that is important. For the entry of our students in US, you only need an RT-PCR, not the vaccination status. If our students can produce a certificate by a company certified by the US that you have been vaccinated and have enough antibodies, and where is the problem?
But Dr. Arora, I understand the point that you're making. You are saying a much simpler solution is to just subject the student to an antibody test. But the problem is, sir, that American universities are being rigid in their stand when they say only Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, or at best Covishield. They're not willing to accept those who've been vaccinated with Covaxin or Sputnik V. If the university is not going to relent, what is the student to do? Do you think the government of India here needs to step in? Also, let's not forget, doctor, that in India so far, there is no study whatsoever on mixing of vaccines. Spain, UK and a few other European countries may have undertaken those trials, but we haven't. We have no data on mixing of vaccines.
So I am not here to tell you about the mixing of the vaccine. What I am simply telling you, even in US, after vaccination, how do you certify that you have enough antibody? There must be some test. So why can't our government take a stance that same test can be done on our patient, on our children who have been vaccinated? If you have enough neutralizing or protective antibodies as per the test which has been authorized by the US authority, to say somebody that vaccine has been effective, then that is a simpler solution. That is something the government can do least to put it up to the US government in a central manner.
So you're making a good point. You're saying the government of India can take this up with the government of the United States and say, please make life easier for our students. But the question I still want to ask you is, sir, we'll have to wait and see if the authorities in the US are willing to accept the result of that test. When you say what is the proof that someone's been vaccinated, at least here in India, I know that people are getting certificates which as proof that they've got vaccination. But I want to very quickly ask you this before I return to the rest of the panel. If a university tells a student who's already received Covaxin or Covishield that you have no choice but to get revaccinated with Pfizer, as a doctor, what would your advice be? What should they do? Is it
Absolutely, there is no
unsafe?
question.
Do you
You
believe it is
cannot mix up
unsafe?
the vaccine in general population without trials. The first and foremost thing is there has been no trial of mixing of the co-vaccine with other vaccination like Pfizer. There has been no study like this. The only thing which has been done till date is a
Okay.
mixing of the Covishield and Pfizer.
Yes.
You just
Yes.
cannot subject our normal young children
Okay.
to the mixing of the vaccine which has not been tried in the field.
So
There is
you
no
would
question of
not
mixing
recommend
those.
it. You would not recommend it. In other words, you're saying it's safer to give up your college seat than to be prepared for revaccination.
No, I'm not saying that. I am very
If it
clear.
comes to
You
that.
just get one antibody test which tells you,
Yes,
even
but
in
sir, that's
US,
not up to
that you have
us.
been protected.
Dr.
So
Arora,
just get that
I understand, I respect the point you're making, but please understand it's not up to you and me and the students. Ultimately, the authorities in the US have to accept that. Okay, let me quickly go back to Sudhanshu Kaushik at this point. Very quick comments from all three of you. Sudhanshu, do you think this could be a good via media? The doctor here suggests let the government of India take this up with US administration and say, you know, we've got to help our students out, maybe subject them with antibody tests and see what can be done next. Though of course he is very clear that mixing of vaccines is not something he would recommend.
Absolutely. I don't want to talk about the medical process in itself and what the next steps for that
But
is.
what would you expect the government of India to do in this situation?
Right. What you're getting at is pressurizing at least the government of India as well as the United States government to work together to ensure that the second largest student demographic in the United States is Indian. So the responsibility lies within these both governments to make sure that this process does not demoralize, it does not limit the success and the potential of these Indian students who have invested financially, socially, and emotionally into studying in the United States and are limited by, to be honest, the lack of policies put in place, or at least the lack of thinking that's gone into the perspective of what this means for international students and what this means for Indian students. So I think that there needs to be more activism and there needs to be more pressure put on both sides of the government to ensure that they scale this up. And listen, when pressure is put on, it works. The fact that the United States government was able to send so many vaccines, or is in the process of sending so many vaccines to the United States, they sent so many concentrators. All this has been done before, so we just need to prioritize students. And I do believe that if we're able to do that, the United States government can enforce
diplomatic pressure can work and therefore should be exerted in this situation. And of course, Sudhanshu is quite right in pointing out that India sends the second largest number of foreign students to the United States every year after China. 2 lakh students. Obviously, these universities do make a lot of money from Indian students. So, I want to quickly go across to Khushi and Rishabh, starting with you, Khushi. I think we can all agree that the government of India perhaps needs to step up pressure here on the authorities and administration in the United States and try and find a solution, a way forward. Do you see that happening? Has any help been forthcoming so far from the government of India in this regard?
I feel like I totally agree with Sudhanshu that if our government talks to the US government, something can be done. But at the end of the day, it's not the government who's put these sanctions on people to enter the country. It's the universities who are making these rules.
But the point is that once there are government-to-government talks, the US administration can always then hold talks with those individual colleges and universities.
Definitely, they can. Like, it would help in a way, but there'll always be an uncertainty if the universities are actually going to listen, because end of the day, they're making their own rules. So they could either just, I feel like listen to the government and have our things sorted.
Okay, so tell us, Rishabh, you of course are wondering whether to take any Indian vaccine at this stage or not. You don't know if you will be allowed entry into the US without having been vaccinated at all. But do you believe, given the current situation, and as was pointed out by Khushi, that some universities may allow online classes initially, others may insist on in-person classes only. Given that and all the uncertainty around vaccines, do you believe that there is a very strong chance that a very large number of Indian students who are waiting to get to the United States this year may actually end up losing their chance to study in the US, may end up giving up their college seats, and lose a year in the process? Do you think that that is very likely?
I think it's likely to an extent, but not very likely, given that different universities have different protocols. Like, for example, my university is he's taken off all offline classes. They're saying that sorry, they have taken off all online classes, and everything has to go in person. And they are very rigid about that now, because especially with New York and the New York mayor posting public posts about how the city is going to go live after 1st July. They do not want to waste any time or any bandwidth at classes. So they have been imploring us to kind of get our vaccines done and arrive in the US maybe sometime before and start taking the classes. Now,
so Rishabh, if your university, Columbia
classes,
University in New York, is insisting on in-person classes, and of course it is one of the best universities in the world, which does have a lot of Indian students in fact, can you tell us what specifically are they telling you to do? I mean, if they know that you've not received a single vaccine, what are they advising you to do?
So on with regards to my situation and certain other situations in cases like me, they have been generous enough to right now say that if there is such a dearth of vaccines or the situation doesn't improve where your government does not bring your second vaccine date to less than 40 days or less than say 60 days, you could come here and get your second dose of vaccine. So they have been accommodating like that. But in terms of entering the campus, they are very rigid. They said even though if the US allows you, we want to protect the rest of the students just for the sake of those bunchful international students. We don't want the other set of other international students getting affected. So I might go there with my one dose, for example, but take classes online in the first 1 month. And then possibly start with the offline classes.
So I think there are at least two questions staring you in the face. One, whether you can actually join the university straight away and attend in-person classes, and two, whether you can even enter the United States without having been vaccinated, considering that you are from India, where the predominant variant has been classified as a variant of concern by the World Health Organization. Certainly a very difficult situation for students and their parents. We certainly hope that the government of India will urge the Biden administration in the US to find a via media to help the students and to sort out this mess, because clearly the students should not have to suffer because of the overall vaccine situation that we have here in India. On that note, I'd like to thank all our guests for joining us on the show. Thanks very much to the viewers for watching.